I'm just delighted to see the crowd that has turned out for this event. It's a very exciting event for me and for our office and for the labs, and it's wonderful that so many people came out for this. This is the first of what we hope will be a series of events, lectures, discussions, which brings together three institutions, the University of Chicago and the two national labs that we manage, Argonne National Lab and Fermi National Lab. We often get together over scientific topics. The overlap among the university and the two labs is primarily high-energy physics and astrophysics, and a lot of that gets discussed. But there isn't so much time to do things informally or to work more broadly. And we hope this is a way to initiate a broader interaction between the labs and the university. So it's particularly pleasing to see the number of people that have come tonight. I should recognize several people. We have here Young-Ki Kim, the Deputy Director of Fermilab, and Mark Peters. It's dark out there, so I can't see where they are, but they are out there somewhere because I saw them both outside. Mark Peters, the Deputy for Programs at Argonne. They were both on the Planning Committee, among other things. And I certainly should give thanks to the Planning Committee. The person who I first heard of this idea of the art of science from and having this sort of an event was Lisa LaValle in my office. And she's the one who I get a dose of enthusiasm daily from her. And she's done an enormous amount of work. I know that because I see it firsthand. She has some partners in crime. One is Matt Howard, the Director of Communications at Argonne, and the other is Bob Rosenberg, the Associate Vice President for Communications in Julie Peterson's office. And I very much appreciate this team putting all of this together. It was a lot of work, and I think a lot of joy for them, and certainly a lot of joy for the rest of us. There was a discussion that took place a couple of weeks ago between me and Larry Norman, the Deputy Provost for Arts, and we each were sort of feeding off of each other. It was the idea that the arts and sciences could come together, and there was some common theme we could discuss. And there's a new initiative being launched by Larry's office, and I'd like him to come up and say a few words. Again, I can't. There you are. Okay.
Thank you, Don. I'll be very brief, but I just wanted to say a word about the Arts Initiative at the University of Chicago and our new Arts and Science Initiative. But the arts at the University of Chicago are quite unique. We don't have a separate school or division of the fine arts or arts, as most of our peer institutions do, which means that our arts programs, both academic and our professional arts programs, have grown out of the work of scholars, faculty members, students from a variety of disciplines, including the physical and natural sciences through the years. And as we move forward, that's the spirit that we want to maintain here. I think we're uniquely positioned for that kind of interdisciplinary work. And as just mentioning, one of the wonderful sites for the future of that kind of work will be the Logan Arts Center, which will be opening in 2012, and groundbreaking will be May 12th, and we hope you can all come. We're happy that the executive director of the Logan Arts Center is with us this evening, Bill Michael. And as part of that interdisciplinary approach, we are now just initiating a new program in the arts and science, which will be led by our program manager, Julie Marie Lemon, who is here with us this evening. And I just want to say, our door is open. We don't even have a wall with a door. We're ready to talk to you, and we want to hear from you. So please talk at the reception afterwards. Contact us. Let us know, and we're very eager to continue the discussion that'll begin tonight.
Larry, thank you very much. The only thing remaining between us and the program is for me to introduce Rocky Kolb, the man for all seasons, who is going to chair the panel tonight. I'm not going to read Rocky's full pedigree. If I did, it would add 15 minutes to the program. We don't have the 15 minutes. I have it here,
You
of
can
course.
have some more
but
time, Don.
I'm not about to read it. But I should mention one or two things about Rocky. He is the Arthur Holly Compton Distinguished Service Professor of Astronomy and Astrophysics. He's also the chair of the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics. He's a member of the college. He's a member of the Enrico Fermi Institute and the Kavli Institute for Cosmological Physics. He is a very distinguished cosmologist, astrophysicist, and he got, I don't know if it was your start, but he came to us, I believe, from Fermilab. He was the founding head of the Theoretical Astrophysics Group and the founding director of the Particle Astrophysics Center at Fermilab. And these are now two activities that are really in the mainstream of Fermilab's activities, and certainly in the mainstream of the University of Chicago's activities. He is a well-known teacher. He's written a couple of books. He won the Quantrell Prize in 1993. And he is a well-known writer. He received the Emmy Award of the American Aeronautical Society for science writing. He also happens to be a wonderful stand-up comedian. And I'm very much looking forward to the panel, and I'm looking forward to Rocky's leading it. Rocky, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Don, but I'm sitting down now. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. And looking out in the audience, I know why you're here. Tonight, you'll experience something new, something remarkable, something that is sure to increase the quality of life at the University of Chicago, something we all desire and want more of. Of course, I refer to valet parking. So the first thing I'd like to do is to introduce our panelists. To my left is Nick Nedden. Nick is a scientist at Fermilab and a professor of astronomy and astrophysics here at the University of Chicago. Nick has wide-ranging research interests from general relativity to the physics of the interstellar medium to cosmology. Currently, most of the time, he works on numerical cosmological simulations, including simulating galaxy formation, the formation of supermassive black holes, and the evolution of the intergalactic medium. Nick likes doing numerics and working with the computer, which often includes quite sophisticated visualization and simulation results. Nick received a PhD from Princeton University and worked as a postdoctoral scholar at MIT and the University of California, Berkeley, before coming to Fermilab in Chicago in 2005. To Nick's left is Elena Shvechenko. Elena is a nanoscientist. And for those of you who don't know what a nanoscientist is, it is a very tiny scientist. She's at Argonne, maybe not that tiny. She's at Argonne National Laboratory Center for Nanoscience Materials. Her specific areas of interest lie in the synthesis of nanoscale materials with controllable size and shape, nanoparticle design, design of materials through self-assembly. In August of last year, Elena joined a select list of the world's youngest top innovators chosen by Technology Review magazine for her work at Argonne. Elena earned a PhD from the University of Hamburg, and she was a postdoctoral fellow at the IBM Research Lab and Columbia University. Prior to coming to Chicago, Elena worked at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in the Center for Nanoscale Materials. And to her left is Jason.
Yes.
Jason is an assistant professor in the visual arts at the University of Chicago and a research fellow in the Computation Institute. He uses software processes of his own design to generate and reconfigure material to present new perspectives on the familiar. His work has been shown in museums and galleries around the world, and reviews and features of his work have been included in publications such as Art Farm, Art in America, the New York Times, and most impressive to me, Wired. His work was recently acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York for their permanent collection and can be found in many other public collections. He has a solo exhibition of his work opening on March 20th, which is next Saturday, at the Tony Wright Gallery in Chicago, which is located where?
West Loop.
West Loop.
845 Washington.
And April 8th in the Feldman Fine Arts Center in Chicago. To his left is Mike Papka. Mike is the Deputy Associate Laboratory Director for Computing, Environment, and Life Sciences at Argonne National Laboratory, as well as the co-director for the Futures Laboratory in the Mathematics and Computer Science Division. He's a senior fellow at the Argonne National Laboratory and at the University of Chicago Computation Institute. His research interests are in the areas of environments, visualization technologies, and the construction of infrastructure that aids in the analysis of data. Mike was a member of the team that won an R&D 100 award for Access Grid software in 2007, and a member of a team that won the Analytics Challenge for real-time change detection and alerts from highway traffic data. So if you're stuck in traffic, it's his fault. He's a member of the Association for Computing Machinery Institute of Electronical Engineers and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Unlike our other panelists, he earned his degree from a prestigious institution, the University of Chicago. Finally, Barbara Stafford is the William B. Ogden Distinguished Service Professor Emerita in Art History at the University of Chicago. Her work has consistently explored the intersections between the visual arts and the physical and biological sciences from the early modern to the contemporary era. Her current research charts the revolutionary ways the neurosciences are changing our views of the human and animal sensorium, shaping our fundamental assumptions about perception, sensation, emotion, mental imagery, and subjectivity. She has written 9 books. Her most recent book is a field guide to a metafield, Bridging the Humanities, Neurosciences Divide, and it will be published, or maybe it has been published, by the University of Chicago Press. So let's give a round of applause for a remarkable panelists. Now I'd like to say a few words before turning this over to the panel discussion. So what I've done is to put together some original thoughts on the art of science. My first original thought quotes from a paper of Robert Wilson, the first director of Fermilab. Robert Wilson was a great scientist and a great artist. He wrote a paper called The Humanness of Physics. And I believe in reading this paragraph, for the purposes of this evening, we can substitute the word science for physics. Wilson was a physicist, so he wrote about physics. And he wrote about humanness, but we could also substitute the word art for this. So let me read this. It's, again, my original contribution written by Bob Wilson. Does it not seem incongruous to be discussing the humanness of physics? For if one subject would appear to be lacking the quality of humanness, it's physics. Physics is characterized by precise measurement and mathematics. It is rigorous. Indeed, it is about as objective as a discipline can get. Yet, in spite of the belief that physics is cold and inhuman, a belief that it has to do only with things, not people, a belief that its Faustian practitioners blindly follow the rites of the scientific method to grind out a plethora of uninteresting facts. In spite of all of this, I am going to maintain that there is a quality of loveliness in the content and in the devices of physics. And it is a beautiful creation which has meaning for man's view of himself and his place in the world. And that these qualities of physics can appropriately be discussed under the rubric of humanness. And I think that's relevant for this evening's discussion if we substitute the word art for humanness and the word science for physics. My other original thought was spoken by Chandrasekhar. In 1979, he wrote a book, Truth and Beauty, Aesthetics and Motivation in Science. And here I will quote Chandrasekhar, quoting the famous mathematician Poincaré. Poincaré says, "The scientist does not actually study nature because it is useful to do so. He studies it because he takes pleasure in it, and he takes pleasure in it because it is beautiful. If nature were not beautiful, it would not be worth knowing, and life would not be worth living." So with those original comments of mine written by other people, I would like to ask some questions to the panel and give them the opportunity to say something and perhaps to engage in conversation. So Nick is sitting to my left. I will sort of ask Nick, your work focuses on astronomy and its visualization. In particular, the visualization of the unseen, of the invisible, of dark matter. So traditionally, astronomy has been a visual science, and I would like to ask you how this has changed in the past 10 or 20 years or so by the use of computers and computation in the visualization of the universe in which we live.
Well, that's true that computers change the way we do astronomy today. Also, probably won't believe, okay, how many astronomers are still working the same way as Ptolemy and Hipparchus worked 2,000 years ago. But with computers, what we can do is to look at something that we can never see with our senses, right? Either because it's unseen or because it's beyond our ability to see. So it's kind of ironic, but if you think about all these galaxies within the myriads of light years around us, the only one we know least about is the one we live in, because we sit inside and we cannot look from it from the outside. So the same is true about the universe. We live in the universe, so we cannot look at the outside. And so computers allow us to take sort of God's view, right, to go outside of the universe and take a look at it from the outside. So can I ask Eric to show picture N6? So this is a view of one of these universes. Well, of course, it's not a real universe. It's the one which is made in a computer, a virtual one. But that's a view from the inside. And of course, it looks very familiar. Every time we have elections, right, it's a map of political parties in the United States, red and blue and some mess. Right? So there's nothing new you see from that. So can we look at N5 now? So this universe from the outside, it's actually something that you have never seen, the universe from the outside. It's a view that the God takes of our universe. Again, it's a computer universe, so it's a simple one. It's probably not as sophisticated as a real one. But it's something that computers allow us, and visualization in computers allows us to do, right? Is to look at this world from the outside and see the unseen and see something that is beyond our ability to see as mortal people. Did that answer the question?
I think so. So let me ask Elena. Elena, looking at your images, they're very colorful and quite beautiful. Could you give us just a view or an idea of how they are made and what does the color represent?
Actually, these images are true. We didn't use any tricks in Photoshop or so. Basically, they are as they are. So, and this, you can see here on these pictures crystals made from nanoparticles, and they're quite thick. And the difference in color is associated with the difference of the thickness at different areas of nanocrystals. So, and and it's pretty much true for the second image, E2. So, this image we call like lagoon. So, and it's also like quite colorful film of nanoparticles. So, and these like dark spots represent also some like small tiny crystals over there. And should I go to next image too?
Yeah.
This one is quite scary, like, right? And it looked like that the picture made by 4 or 5 years old kid, like, right? But in fact, it's also colloidal crystals made from nanoparticles of cadmium selenide, and they were the same size, but still you can see some areas where the sample is green and like red. So, and we are like now debating why it is so. Either this is like, due to some collective phenomena, or it's just like a matter of some size variation in the sample. So,
thank you. Jason, it's maybe considered by some people to be unusual to be a professor in the visual arts and a fellow in the Computation Institute. Defend your job. Are you getting salary?
That's
How do you do that?
well, I'm an artist, so what that means sort of in the sort of most basic way is that I make objects, experiences, installations for gallery and museum, exhibition audiences for public display and public presentation. And in some sense, I follow a real traditional trajectory of art history. There are things that I'm inspired by and that have come before me in art history that are really part of the DNA of what I do. But what's different, I think, is that I write my own software. Right? I work primarily using high-speed computation to generate these artworks. So I think that's the justification for my appointment. But the objects themselves, I think, speak to both of these things. They speak, at least that's my hope. Can you put up J8? So this is a photographic print, and it's about this size. That's pretty close to the actual size of the print. It's if you saw it, it's much crisper. The color's more vibrant, and you think this is sort of this abstract, sort of rhythmic thing. And it's actually an entire film. It's every frame from the top-grossing film of all time, as of last year, Titanic. So, and what I've done is I've done some analysis on a per-frame basis and reconfigured the piece as pure color, but with still some truth. So in the upper left-hand corner is the beginning of the film, and you sort of go down to the lower right-hand corner is the end of the film. And so while it's pure color, you still have the original narrative is still buried just in this color content. So, you have little events, narrative events. Right here is sort of where the ship goes down. Up higher is I'm king of the world. And my intentions, I think, are to work, visually and to achieve something both aesthetically and conceptually, but also to use tools in a more rigorous way, more of a scientific way. So when I make a claim about this being every frame of Titanic, and I've done a sort of rigorous operation, I want to honor that claim in a sort of scientific process sort of way. I can add more later, but...
Okay, thank you. Mike, you are centered in the science of visualization and how to use visualization in a creative way to help scientists as well as the public understand things better. Is this a new idea or something that's been helped by computers?
So kind of following Rocky's lead, I'll say just everything Jason just said, just put scientist where he said artist, and we'll leave it at that. The visualization, though, isn't necessarily a new thing, and computers have definitely changed it. There was a report to the National Science Foundation in 1987 that kind of set the tone for scientific visualization from computers. And it's as 14-year-old boys have bought more and more gaming platforms, our job has gotten easier. I started out working on very expensive graphics cards that cost $100,000, and now they're $150. A lot of the stuff that Jason did say is similar to the goals that we have. I want to produce images that not only help the scientists understand their data, but that's a small part. We also want to encourage question asking from the general public. In terms of most of my work, which is on computer simulation data, can we pop M1 up? This simulation here, is a simulation of turbulent flow, and it was calculated over the course of a week, running constantly on 65,000 processors. The data that was written out from the simulation is more than 2,000 DVDs. It took a month to transfer it back from Lawrence Livermore to Argonne and the University of Chicago. And in this image alone, there's 800 million data points. So how do you translate all that raw data into an image that somebody can understand? And that's at the heart of what I'm working on. In this example here, it's still hard to see. Each of these particles represent one pixel on the screen, or get translated into a pixel on the screen, so you can't see 800 million particles. They represent the velocity of each particle at that moment in time. And from the standpoint of the scientists, this wouldn't be the most effective tool. But it would be, if we can go to M2, and you kind of just saw this image, which is kind of washed out now. You may look at it from a different standpoint and say, well, that's interesting looking. What is it? So a lot of the scientific visualization is engaging people to ask questions. For the scientists, it's much more practical. We would choose to trace one particle, maybe through time, so they can see where it moves throughout the space. As you develop simulations, these are very much an instrument, as Nick said, for experiments that you can't do in the real world. If you're running on 65,000 processors, I'm sure you have all used Windows, and that can be a challenge. Well, imagine 65,000 processors and trying to figure out what's going on with your code. So another useful tool for visualization is not just the pretty pictures we see here, but helping understand, okay, which processors did these particles run on? And if you're trying to maximize the performance of your simulation, you'll want that to be balanced across the machine. So a lot of the visualization that we also do is not always aesthetically pleasing, but it's to help the scientists further their experiments.
Thank you, Mike. At the far end, Barbara, I'm intrigued by the title of your most recent book, A Field Guide to a Metafield, Bridging the Humanities Neurosciences Divide. I would ask, how do you bridge it?
Could we turn off these lights, and I'd like to show you something. Is it possible to plunge us into darkness? Could I have B1, please? I'm going to take a slightly different approach from my colleagues and say that the book that Rocky kindly mentioned grew out of, I was Templeton Fellow at USC and gave lectures on what I'd like to identify as the ways in which the arts and especially the brain sciences, the new brain sciences, together are now really converging on problems that have preoccupied each of them separately for a very long time. And I'm just going to give you one example of this. In other words, this is really to ask, in what way does high-order imaging, I want to define art as high-order imaging, not just as illustration of this or that bit of data or datum, how does it allow you to see a problem or tackle a problem that you couldn't do otherwise. And I want to take the problem of mirror neurons, mirror systems in general, and I'm going to show you a Ferdinand Hodler landscape painting. This is certainly an example of high-order imaging, late 19th century landscape painting, to suggest that one of the things that the visual arts might contribute to the sciences, and of course it's a two-way street, is reminding them of the complexity of what is meant when one speaks of mirroring. It is never a flat mirror, even in the mirror of Narcissus. It is always, as Plato recognized, about that ripple in the middle that distorts. Those of you who come from neuroeconomics, decision-making, interested in social cognition, know that there is always that gap in the moment of reflection. It also reminds us, I think, the way in which contemporary technologies, hard copies, Xeroxes, are very remote from what in the Western tradition of aesthetics was called mimetics or mimesis, that had a kind of softness and give in this exchange between one organism and another at the level of action. And it's this kind of thing, this sort of question, this sort of problem that the book addresses. Not just myself, it's my first collaborative volume. I have 10 contributors, from actually neuroscientists to new cognitive anthropology, cognitive archaeology, to musicology, enormous amount of interest in music and brain sciences. It's this sort of wrapping around in a very concrete fashion around a problem that requires, I would like to suggest, both sides of the aisle first to identify, then to define, and hopefully ultimately solve together. If I could have, I'll show you just one more example. Let's just take B4 for the hell of it, to suggest formalism, to talk a little bit about brain modularity discussions. I mean, there's also neuroplasticity. I show you here Roman pavement, goes back to Appia Antica, the old Roman way. And the question I throw out to the audience is, why is the grid such an ancient and such a modern format? What is it that it tells us about the internal organization of the brain? And what does its cultural instantiation give back? How might it help reshape questions in the brain sciences, particularly you guys interested in brain modularity issues? I'm thinking of V.S. Ramachandran, Semerzecki, a whole crowd out there interested in that kind of question. So I'll end, Rocky promised him 5 minutes, by simply saying that what I would like, my point this evening is that if we're going to think about this very deep connection between the arts and sciences, I would like to urge us to think about it not simply as one is the illustration of another, but asking how, when the two come together, how a third thing is born that would not exist otherwise.
Thank you, Barbara. I was intrigued by something you said. You gave a definition of art, right?
High-order imaging.
Many people
high-order
would
images,
not,
which some scientific images are high-order images. Not all are.
So I'd like to push on that. Many people would be reluctant to give a definition of art, but obviously not art professors.
Well, I'm a very strange one.
Your definition of art is high-order imaging.
Yes.
Could you expand on that a little bit? And then I'm going to ask the scientists here to define science, to see whether there's art in science.
I think there are very many crummy scientific images, and there are very many crummy cultural images. I would like to define a high-order image is an image not only that has a great deal of thought behind it. This is my definition. I'm not saying this is art historical definition, but it is an image also that puts a responsibility on the beholder. It demands and exacts a kind of intellectual cognitive labor coming from the other side, from the receiver's side. It also obviously is involved with craft, technology, if you will, but not an automatic technology, not automatic image processing, not automatic image recognition, but that 10% of the prefrontal cortex, that 10% of the brain that is involved in the active construction of the world. That's what I call a high-order image, and it is not limited to the art world. It goes across the board. It goes across the board. It possesses elegance, and in that sense it possesses elegance, function, beauty, you name it. That's my definition.
That's a great answer. I always think that professors should be able to profess things.
Did I do it, Rocky?
You did it. You did it. You did it. I'm not sure I understood everything you professed, but it was great. So let me turn to the scientists. So the title of this is The Art of Science. We just heard a definitive definition, I guess, of science. I guess I can say that. Of art. So, Elena, what is science, and how is it different than art?
I can say that we can make very high order images using nanoparticles. So, from this point, probably we are really great artists. So, and if you will show, a picture number.
Sure.
Which one?
As a synthetic
E4.
biologist. Yes.
So this is actually a transmission electron micrograph consisted, and it depicts the quasi-crystalline structure consisted of two types of materials, and I would say that it's not worse than Roman pavement, so it's quite periodic, and we can make much better job in terms of periodicity. So, and and how I define science then,
Absolutely. So Barbara, you showed the Roman pavement, and I was struck by the order. And perhaps, would you think the thing that attracts us to it is the order in it? And isn't science, in some sense, a search for order in a seemingly complex world?
Well, I was going to just very quickly, if I can show you B5, which is Ken Snelson tensegrity, and B6, which is a dust painting by an anonymous dust artist. What's quite interesting and is, of course, being studied in a number of ways. I mean, it comes also out of those people like Jack Cowan here at the University of Chicago, wonderful mathematician, very interested in studying the geometric patterns of hallucinations, that whether you're looking at ayahuasca in Peru and Ecuador, those hallucinations, or you're looking at people with a certain kind of dementia, it's extraordinarily interesting that one passes through a certain geometric sequence of forms. I mean, I'm getting at your question, Rocky. Just as Ken Snelson's, if we go back one to the tensegrity, plays on something again that has a huge, long history within the history of art. If we ask ourselves, why is the vertical, the horizontal, the oblique? Why are those such central orientations? Well, they also correspond to a certain kind of neuroanatomy. And that isn't to say that things don't shift and change, but I think we're at a wonderful moment where actually we can look at something that's been despised in the history of art or in the art world for a long, long while now, and that is formalism. We can take a look at the structure of things and why certain visual structures entice us and others perhaps require additional learning. So I think it's a rather wonderful moment to think about systems of ordering. Elena is interested in self-assembly. I mean, that isn't casual, that isn't chaotic. Self-assembly has a system of organization associated with it. I don't care whether you're looking at cracking in the Mojave Desert or you're looking at nanoparticles. There's a system at work there. That systematicity, again, it gets to the point I was making. It's a moment where I think certain problems are converging and coming together, and they really require both sides of our diverse aisles.
Thank you. So let me turn back. We have a definition of art, and I'd like to ask Nick, define science, give 3 examples.
I don't think we have to define science, right? It was already defined. I forgot who said it. But someone, a great scientist, said that science is satisfying your curiosity at the government expense.
What was that?
I think that's what science is for me.
Something at government's expense. Say it again, Nick.
Satisfying your curiosity at the government's expense.
Mike, help us out here.
Robert did such a good job. All right, it's hard to. Man, I think in a lot of ways, the process as a scientist that we go through, the discovery, the thought process, it's as creative as the process that you go through during the generation of art. There is this, quest for an answer that I would say comes from science. But I've always believed that science and art have this very natural connection in the way you think about a problem, the way you attack it, the way you iteratively try to improve upon it. So it's not really an answer to what science is, but there's a strong connection.
Well, Jason, you seem to do both art and science, or is it science-informed art, or is it artistic science? How do you define what you do?
It's complicated, but it would be the former. I mean, it's art that uses some scientific processes and is inspired by some of the ideas and thinking of science to sort of elaborate, at least on my view, of the kinds of shared spaces between scientific inquiry and artistic exploration. A couple things that come to mind are modeling, right? That much of science is about modeling some example or some proposition for how things work, for how the world is working, right? So, and digital tools are really accelerating the ability to model things. So if we're talking about the cracks in the Mojave Desert, we actually might set up a piece of software with tons of little particles and see if we can get them to crack, like the Mojave Desert. We can actually model that thing. And artists are really engaged with modeling, many from a different perspective. My perspective actually runs somewhat more parallel to scientific approach, but many artists are modeling using training and skill and even some bits of intuition about sort of modeling their world and their experience. The other thing I think that's really sort of sympathetic between the disciplines is that sort of sense of wonder, that sense of I can find the new thing out there, that there are discoveries yet to be made. And I've always been inspired by scientific discovery in that way, that there are that I'm part of a continuum, and we're operating at the edges of possibility, right? We're looking to find these new spaces and new discoveries to be made, and I think there is a lot of sort of sympathy between the actual approaches, right? The approaches we make.
So I'm a scientist. I'm not an artist, but in fact, some of my best friends talk to artists. And I'd like to sort of throw a question out. Do you think the motivation of an artist and a scientist is different? And if it's different, or the same? If it's different, sort of in what way?
I think the generative motive is different, right? So there was a point in my academic sort of travels where I was really considering a scientific discipline. And one of the things that guided me toward art was a certain kind of looseness, right? A certain kind of independent looseness about making decisions on the fly about what a particular project would be. And I think scientists have obviously this incredibly important and super valuable role that it requires a kind of precision and rigor and one of the things I was thinking about was that the evaluative mechanisms, how we evaluate the success of an artwork and how we evaluate, and this is maybe where there's much common ground, but where there's separation, it is in the evaluative, right? So how do we evaluate the success of a scientific theory? Well, there are lots of really sort of involved in and established methods for doing that, and art is a little bit different, right? How do we do that? Well, there's a collective sort of consensus that gets built, and that consensus can shift, and the canon can shift. I want to talk about a piece that I just finished that sort of relates to these ideas. Can you put up J6? So this is a still from a video piece, but it's a video in the sort of oddest sense of the word, in that it's not moving in any human sense of perception. So it's a 4-hour piece, and over the course of 4 hours, this skull, which is sort of a baboon skull, transforms through human and bear and boar. If you can go to J7. And so in a sense, I'm really interested in the vanitas still life, which is a classical still life form. At the same time, I'm really interested in all the evolutionary fictions that are possible. What is the animal that's 24% baboon and 18% wild boar, and we can actually visualize that. Now, it takes some work, but we can actually visualize a vanitas. So over 4 hours, this thing sort of transforms out of human perception, so it's super slow. It looks like a photograph. And so I think these are with digital tools and with sort of an openness about the intersection of science and art, my own interests are to sort of explore these territories of a space of possibilities, and then sort of exploring instances of those spaces, right? Okay.
Thank you. So I'd like someone to compare what they think to be the impulses of an artist and a scientist. So what drives an artist? We have artists here. What drives a scientist? We have scientists here.
I think scientists want to see what is inside, right? And artists, they want to express themselves, right? I don't know.
Barbara? Do artists want to express themselves?
We do it for the girls.
Could I back up for just 1 second? I just want to back up 1 second. I want to ask the scientists a question because it's apropos your last question. If I can just, and Jason's very excellent answer when he was talking about the looseness of art and the evaluative. I'm just wondering if another way of getting at it is to put it from the institutional perspective, and I'd be curious how many of the scientists in this audience feel that they had to deform, and I'm going to use that word on purpose, their research in order to get a grant from NSF or NIH. In other words, in writing grant proposal after grant proposal, if there is, I'm sure there's somewhere perhaps the kernel, but I wonder if some of the ideas that you wish to pursue, and perhaps it's those premières pensées, those ideas that artists and scientists share, that somehow get lost in attuning yourself endlessly to the dictates that come out of the granting agencies, and that one morning you wake up and you don't recognize anymore what your research is. I just ask it like this. I'm just curious. I'm curious because it raises a larger question about, I would also say, the institutionalization of art, which also one could say has happened. But if one thinks of this kind of free moment of having an idea that requires instantiation, and then, of course, what happens to it in order to get it concretized, it seems to me that maybe because of the grant getting that is so much part of the scientists, that perhaps that makes us more separate than we might be. I'm just going to throw it out as a thought.
Do you think there's a fundamental difference between, I would never do it myself, of course, but a scientist sort of deciding what to work on because they can get funded, and an artist deciding what to do because they can sell it?
I said it was also it's also something. I want to raise that question. I mean, I want to raise that question, but I think that because the funding levels and the institutions are so different, and the scale is different. I'm talking really about the idea. I don't know. I don't have an answer to it. It's a question that I'm posing. I haven't done a survey of scientists to ask them whether they feel there's a day that they wake up and they say, I no longer recognize the thing that I generated and that excited me in whatever the proposal was that I finished. I don't know. I just throw it out. It's something one could say. Obviously, the art market has done to some extent as well, but I don't know.
Do they have tenure yet?
Pardon me?
Do they have tenure?
The question is it...
No, but I'm not trying to get into, I don't want to make some huge hash of this, but it's just, it seems to me that maybe I'm trying to get at the looseness point.
I mean, maybe that wasn't the
that Jason
right
raised,
phrase.
Which is, of course, not that loose, but it's still looser, it seems to me, than that's all.
There's still I would say that it's. I don't think the differences are actually that great, but I do think that the evaluative sort of structures are pretty great. And then there is a little bit, the artists are typically, there are collaboratives, but most artists work alone. So you're sort of out there on your own with the thing you've made behind you or next to you, and you own it. And so... And
most starve.
And in that sense, I mean, fabricating for a market never makes any sense. Most are not going to be good enough doing sort of what they think the market wants. The market we don't know what the market wants, so there's no point in even sort of guessing, right? It's better off just to sort of follow your own scent, right? Put your nose to the ground and figure out where you go. But there is a world around you, and fashion and things like that are in play. I think they're in play in science as well, right? So we all start chasing eco stuff, or we all start chasing whatever, or, so I think those things sort of operate in both realms as well.
Barbara, you're probably exaggerating the level that there's a grant pressure on scientists. I think if a scientist has to bend his ideas to get grants, he's just a bad scientist. Right? And there are historical examples where political pressure caused the scientists to bend this, and the result of that was killing the science. So I don't think it's actually that different. And intellectual freedom is immensely important for the science.
I have a question for Barbara. Your question raises an interesting question. Working 30-odd years either doing science or supporting science or managing science. Whatever I've done, I try to find joy in that aspect. However, when you gave the first statement, first you said order, then you mentioned order, then you said beauty, then you said elegance, and never did you mention joy. And now is actually your last question, where is the joy?
Yes. I mean, it is, again, something, it seems to me, that as opposed to automatic image generation, which a great deal of scientific visualization currently is, that the joy comes precisely in, I'm so glad yours are not false color images, I have to say that. It comes exactly in the première pensée, in the idea and in the hands somehow in the work. And that's not to be a Luddite and nostalgic, but I think that's something we share too. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get off on a tangent, but it seemed to me that question of the pressure of constantly writing, I just wondered whether you feel it skews the work, just as one could say the art market skews in some ways the artwork, and we would share that as well. So that's just a thought.
Let's see, there was a mention of pleasure or joy. And what I'd like to do is to quote Chandrasekhar quoting Roger Fry, a British artist and art critic. Some of you are familiar with him. I believe he was the subject of a Virginia Woolf biography. So Fry wrote about comparing the impulses of an artist and a scientist. From the merest rudiments of pure sensation up to the highest efforts of design, each part in the process of art is accompanied by pleasure. It cannot proceed without it. It is also true that the recognition in thought is normally accompanied by pleasurable emotion, and that the desire for this mental pleasure is the motive force which impels to the making of scientific theory. So, are scientists and artists alike because we're just enjoying ourselves? Or is there a difference? Is there, people talk about suffering for art. I know Nick suffers for science, right?
Not just me. Some people burn for science.
And Elena, I'd like to turn to you, and you were very proud and mentioned that your images are not false color.
No.
I don't understand what false color is. Is this color as perceived by you? Are you so I know you're a humanist, but are you why are humans? Is it false color as perceived by some other species, or what's wrong with false color?
Nothing is wrong. It's just basically, Photoshop provides you this opportunity to play with colors, right? And just adjust them according to your taste, right? So, but nothing wrong with them, I guess.
Barbara, what's wrong with false color?
There's nothing wrong with false color if it is properly indicated, and just like there's a difference between, as Edward Tufte in that lovely book on mapping and making of charts and what are junk charts and what are charts that are actually full of information, if it's indicated. But I read Nature and I read Science quite regularly, and I've noticed, the standards, there have been, of course, issues about the images, the visualizations that have appeared with those articles, and a lot of them have to do with people not understanding what it is that they're looking at, and I would say that if that translates to the general public, I had a wonderful student who actually wrote on the NASA Mars imagery, and one of the things that came out is, this was a PhD student, one of the things that came out, how many people in the public, I'm talking about the American public, actually thought that they were looking at direct photographs of Mars. And there is some huge failure in our education. And I'm hoping, Rocky, that you are pulling my leg when you say you do not know what false color is. That is this artificial assigning of you are pulling my leg because you have a comic nature.
I'm just trying to be provocative.
I must educate you in private. I can't do it this evening.
Provocative.
That's all right. But anyway, I think that they're in, I still, and I'm correctable. Some people don't believe it, but I am correctable. If I believe there are scientists out there who still think that the images that accompany their articles are pretty pictures, that kind of make a sale. That, I think, is what I've been trying to undercut, at least in my remarks this evening, when I say they instantiate something. They're not just a way to sell a project. And false coloring, and there are other issues, nanoscale, certainly the nano world, as you know, Elena, is really, I was invited, I get invited, believe it or not, to science panels on coloring especially, but also on visualization more generally. And a lot of the nano images are really problematic from that point of view. So I just want to praise.
So let me ask one more false color question. Nick, when you show us images of dark matter, what colors do you use?
Can you show N4? What? Can you show N4? This is actually the image of the invisible dark matter. So if anyone tells you tomorrow that dark matter is invisible, you can say it's nonsense, I've seen it, it's light blue. Yeah, of course it's false color. I mean, there's no color at all. Right? So the concept of false color only applies to our eyes. Our eyes can see a tiny fraction of the world around us. Right? So everything which we cannot see is going to be shown in false color. It won't be even false, it won't be even color. It will be color representation of something that we cannot see with our eyes. There's no other way we can look at it except looking in false color or looking at the number of digits, numbers on the sheet of paper, which doesn't convey anything.
So we're going to take questions from the audience in just a moment. But since we have answered all the pressing issues, I'd like to close by another original quote from Bob Wilson. Bob writes at the end of his article, "One of the greatest failures is the inhumanness of the world of physics." And again, you can substitute science for physics. Physicists, not unnaturally, have taken the business of physicists to be the creation of physics. The business of physicists should also be concerned with the poetry and drama of physics, with the beauty of its form and function. The business of physics should also be the business of humanists and artists. Where have we lost this direction? Now, I don't know whether we have lost this direction, but I think some of the initiatives here at the university are designed to put us back on the direction of connecting the humanists of science with art and the other humanities. And I think this only can be a good thing, and I applaud its inception, and I wish it well. Now I'd like to take some questions from the audience. And we have people with microphones. Let's see, we have a
of art and science is the ability to imagine. I think that's what draws you to it, is the ability to create and imagine what you cannot see. I was drawn to biology by the idea that you can look at the human body, but inside there's all these little platelets and all these other things that the eye cannot see, and I would argue that that's what draws children to all of these different departments, is the idea to imagine and to be able to create. When a kid thinks of science, they don't think of the things that, oh, this wood is made of this and ions and this of that. What they think about is the things that they can't see. Those images of Mars that I know exactly what you're talking about because they were in my book. But, those are the things that excited you. Those are the things that made you imagine beyond the things that you saw right in front of you. And I would argue that part of art and science that makes it beautiful is the ability to go beyond anything that is physical. People can say certain things about a dancer and everything, but the beauty in being a dancer is to be able to mold your body into these things that people could never imagine. And if we were just constricted to the things that we saw, then I think life would be a lot less joyful.
I don't think I said that.
No, I'm not saying that you said that, but
I would agree with you.
But I'm saying that something about artificial color, is the same about when a dancer puts on a costume.
Yeah, no. It's not the same thing. All I was saying is that it needs to be, people need to understand that. Oh, I agree with absolutely everything you say, that the invisible has to be visibilized somehow. Yeah. One just has to indicate properly how that's done, and that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think my only idea is that
I think it's a lovely
remark. And that maybe this is just me. Again, I'm a dancer. I believe in musical, and I believe life should be a musical. I don't think the two worlds necessarily have to be separated. It's nice to sometimes step into a world that isn't that of everyday life. It allows you to escape. It's something that isn't a reminder of how every day has a pattern, everything is geometric. It allows you to see life in circles.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Please wait for the microphone.
I have a question. I mean, this goes back to the beginning of...
Let's see, the microphone doesn't... Sorry, Fausto, the microphone...
Does it work now?
Yes.
Okay, so this goes back to the beginning of the proceedings, and a quote by Rocky quoting Chandra, quoting Poincaré. And if I remember correctly, you said something like, if life were not beautiful, it wouldn't be worth living, or something along those lines. So it is possible to conceive of creatures that would find life not particularly beautiful and therefore not worth living, and they would become extinct. And they'd be gone. So we're not gone, we're here, we're discussing this matter. So if the statement is to be taken seriously, you would say, we do find life worth living because we find it beautiful and so forth and so on. So if all of these things hang together, there must be, one could argue that there has to be a biological or evolutionary origin to a sense of beauty, because if you didn't have it, if that statement were to be believed, you would have just kind of given up somewhere along the way. So I suppose my question is, tonight there are artists and there are physicists or scientists. There aren't that many biologists. Should the biologists be involved in this kind of proceedings?
No.
Because
I think so.
Because maybe the origin of beauty, which is, after all, an interesting issue, may actually be impossible to districate from the fact that it's being perceived mostly by biological creatures. And so one could ask the question, one could ask two questions. Question number one is, we are, unlike the simulations that Nick was showing, we are not able to transcend our human condition and look at physics from outside physics. We're stuck with the physical laws. I mean, we are made of we obey the physical laws. And everything we do obeys the physical laws. And so whatever we perceive as being beautiful or not beautiful or this or that or the other is also subject to these laws. And whether we find them beautiful or not, it somehow, it has to be subject to the same evolutionary pressures that made us what we are. So when we address issues of beauty and things like that, should we conceive of an evolutionary path to our perception of beauty? I mean, is that a useful thing to do? And so the question, I guess, if we do this again, shouldn't we invite more biologists? So that's the question.
I think so. I think so. Steve Pinker would certainly agree with you, and I mean, stuff of thought, as would the neural Darwinists. I mean, people like Gerald Edelman, who has a lovely theory of reentry. If one asks, why is it that biology and culture need to come back together again, I would say definitely yes. I mean, there's quite a bit of thinking out there on that question that you raised. Thank you for raising it.
Yeah, it's a very good. So I hope I made it clear. When I read from Bob Wilson's writings that we should substitute the word scientist, and many biologists are scientists, for the word physicist. But Fausto brought up the issue of beauty. And Elena, you take beautiful images of things that exist. Now, Nick and Mike, you do a lot of computer simulations. And so, for instance, of dark matter. Now, of course I know dark matter exists, but there's some remote possibility that it doesn't. Would your images still be beautiful if dark matter doesn't exist? And Mike, are the images that you make in visualizing things, if the underlying theory or what you're trying to discover turns out to be wrong in some way, is it still beautiful? Is science only beautiful because it's correct?
I think it's the other way around, right? If dark matter did not exist, then my images would become art.
I was going to say, a lot of my code, when it has a bug in it, it's definitely not correct, and I walked away saying, well, this is very cool looking, and saved the image anyway because it looked good. So I think it's true.
Let's see, we had another question there.
Hello? Okay, it's more of a comment again, sorry. And it's an attempt to answer Bob Wilson's question, where have we lost the direction to humanness? And just follow my logic. I think at the very beginning we were shown a number of very beautiful images. And many of us agreed, boy, they really look great, they're really beautiful. And it actually caught the eye from the very first glance at them. And all these images, if you remember, were extremely complex. Right? So they were very, very complex. And you look into them and you see many details, and you immediately get that this is beautiful. What I'm trying to say that in real life, many of us work on some subjects for extremely long time, and many images or many artifacts which we saw and consider beautiful are much more simple. For example, the most beautiful things which I delivered in my scientific life look like a crossing of two lines. But I spent my whole life in getting in these two lines, and the way I see it as beautiful is deeply linked to the effort I put into that. So now slowly follow. If you put enough effort, you can get beauty and art in anything. So that's partly the answer to Bob Wilson's question. Where have we lost the direction to humanness? As soon as we start to live fast, as soon as we start to lose attention to what's going on and comprehension of what's going on, we lose direction and we lose the sense of humanness. The story. Let me give you a story from the art business. So one of the greatest Russian directors of movies his name was Andrei Tarkovsky. His motto and the way he built his pictures was following. If you take anything in your life, for example, your breakfast or anything, just picture it and show it to your friend at a normal speed. Yeah, he may get it. He gets the idea, yeah, people get breakfast. Then slow up the speed by a factor of 3. And it becomes extremely boring. So your neighbor will hate to see this breakfast at 3 times the speed, slower the speed. But if you reduce it by a factor of 30, anyone will have enough time to understand something behind it because he or she puts enough effort in thinking about it, in getting into that, effort of his own. And then people start to see the beauty or the essence of the moment, the beauty of the essence of everything, of the things. So that's my answer. Live slow, then you will get it.
Let's have a final question by Mr. Heinrich Jäger.
So sorry, I didn't. This is maybe not a question, it's a wrench. I wanted to throw a wrench in here. There's all this talk about beauty. Now, I'm a scientist, and I would pose that some of the most exciting science has nothing to do with beauty. In fact, some of the most exciting science to me is deeply disturbing. It's exactly the science that disturbs me, that pulls my socks off, that I like. And I would venture that the best, let's put it that way, the most exciting art is clearly not the one that's beautiful, but it's often, at least, the one that is disturbing, that is searching for something, that's discovering for something, just like science. And I would think beauty is stale. I think we should go and introduce something that is disturbing into the discussion.
Okay, so Steve Barry wants to introduce something disturbing.
Yeah,
and we have two more questions.
I want to try to counter Heinrich's wrench by quoting another scientist, Paul Dirac.
I've heard of him, yes.
Who felt that in order for an equation to be correct, it had to be beautiful. And if it was beautiful, it probably was correct.
Steve, could you?
Barbara, this is mainly addressed to you. I find in the three photographs that you showed, there was one common characteristic. They had symmetry, reflection symmetry or rotational symmetry in the tensegrity and so forth.
Right.
Now it is known, and you talk about how do we perceive, but it is known that the human retina sees objects more sharply when they're symmetric.
Yes.
And so how much of that is important when we perceive something as beauty?
Well, I mean, that would be part of the maybe the ways in which if one just I have something to say about the distortion, the other in relation to, I mean, these two are antiphonal questions. I would say that what's interesting, and the reason that one can find similitudes across cultures is precisely because of certain kinds of things being hardwired. The way, for example, the crystalline structure of the striate cortex, that certainly is enormously important. What's interesting about the distortion question and the disturbing question is that there is a systematicity to that as well. That is, the things that disturb us are things that permutate the regularities. And the study of that, those two things, I mean, we're talking as if they're two separate things. They're not. They belong to two sides of the same equation, if I can put it that way. And what's wonderful, I think, about the emerging brain sciences, and I want to applaud again the person who spoke about the need to bring biology, evolutionary biology, Evo, Devo, you can talk about all the stuff that needs to be brought here, brought into this discussion, is the way in which it talks about the fine-tuning of culture in that, the way in which, and I cite Gerald Edelman again, how it is that we become accustomed to in the shaping of the so-called secondary repertoire, the pruning that goes on within each one of us, how that allows things to enter back into the sensorium in a sharpened way, which makes us then understand neuroplasticity and why we can take in more and more distortion, things that depart precisely from, say, Ken Snelson's tensegrity. That's fascinating, but they're two sides of the same coin. And I would say that the interest in systems theory is really very important, both in the arts and in the sciences, finding new ways of understanding how it is as humans that we visually organize the world. And so we're, I think, at a great moment. And thank you for that question, and thank you, Heinrich, for that comment about
but that cannot be true,
departure.
because you go somewhere outside and you look on beautiful nature, there's nothing regular there, but it's something that is extremely soothing and beautiful. So regularity, the breakout of regularity is not necessarily disturbing.
No, here I would say Mark Hansen's work, Mark Hauser's work on what he calls the skeletal, at Harvard, he's a cognitive psychologist, and he writes about what used to be called primes in psychology, that is the ways in which we look at the world and we take out the quintessence out of precisely what you're talking about, and that quintessence is a kind of skeletal substructure which possesses a kind of order. I mean, they're the primes that are lodged underneath the disorder that faces us. And now, why do we do that? I mean, that's the question. And I think that's the question the scientists ask, and it's something that I think the art world has a great deal to give in return, just as I think this new science has a great deal to give to us as well.
Okay, let me sort of wind up. Elena was kind enough to provide me with the dictionary definitions of art and science, in case anyone is confused by this. Art is the human effort to imitate, supplement, alter, or counteract the work of nature. I'm not exactly sure how you counteract the work of nature, but that's the definition. And the dictionary definition of science is the observation, identification, description, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanation of phenomena. I think what we've learned tonight is that art and science is much more than the dictionary definition of it. And I would like to thank the panelists for enlightening us, and I would like to give them a round of applause. And I would like to call on Don Levy to close the evening and thank him for providing us a wonderful evening with valet parking.
One of the great joys of working at these three institutions, and I work at all three of them, is just by wandering the streets and grabbing every here and there, you can put together a world-class panel like this to provide an evening like tonight. So I very much appreciate the panel. I very much appreciate Rocky's help with this. Now it's time for dessert. This being the University of Chicago, of course, it's intellectual dessert, which is the discussion which will go on outside, I'm sure, about all the things we have seen and heard tonight. But for those of us who need the real thing, there also are some sweets out there. And I invite everybody to go out, enjoy the conversation, and enjoy the real dessert. Thank you very much.